G'day, ZiggyD here, and in this video I want to give you guys an updated version of my No Hatred Generator Demon Hunter build guide. This build is designed to farm rifts and, bounties in a pinch, but mostly farming rifts in higher torment difficulty levels. But this build has been very effective for me, and it's been slowly, organically updating over time. The simple goal, I think, for any Demon Hunter now is to simply wean yourself off of the need of hatred generators. Now, hatred generator skills are okay, they're alright, and they're good for getting started, and I think all good beginners Demon Hunter builds, and if you are a beginner Demon Hunter and you only have like kind of starter gear, like a bunch of rares, not many legendaries, that sort of thing, then you may want to check out, link down in the description below, my beginners, like my starter Demon Hunter build. But the goal of all advanced Demon Hunters is to wean themselves off of the need for that hatred generator. They don't deal that much damage, and they don't actually kind of do that much, and eventually you don't actually need to use them to generate hatred. There's plenty of other really good ways of generating hatred or getting your resource costs down to a point where you can just spam cluster arrow a lot more and then use a much better skill as your AoE skill instead. So something like Chakram, like in my build. There's a few other people making similar builds like this I've seen, and certainly some multi-shot builds, and I'll talk about multi-shot in this video, but I want to go over how to get yourself sort of going into this point of a Demon Hunter, what sort of gear requirements you actually have to have, and how to actually create a build like this. In another video I might talk about sort of weaning yourself off of our hatred generators in a bit more detail, but we'll stick with just the build for now. So let's switch on over and we'll take a look at it. So the general concept is basically that Cluster Arrow, loaded for bear, is a fire damage skill, and it deals a lot of damage, 770 weapon damage, and you can spam it very, very quickly. So 770 weapon damage on impact, in addition to 220 for 4 additional grenades, so 4 times 220 from the grenades there. So very high impact damage, and then a lot of extra damage in a small AoE. Now this skill is probably one of the strongest Demon Hunter skills at the moment, and it's certainly one that you can use to leverage your DPS very effectively, to farm rifts and kill elites and things like that very quickly. Now, my other spin on this is to use Chakram as my generator. Chakram is my generator, and as you may know, Chakram is not a generator, it's a hatred spender. However, it's such a cheap and efficient hatred spender in this setup that it actually works out to be a generator. So basically, I smash down elites and tightly clustered packs with Cluster Arrow until my resources are pretty much all the way down. So you can see I can kind of just spam my resources here. I get down low on hatred, pop Preparation Punishment, prop Preparation Punishment, and when I get to about this point, I switch over to Chakram. Now, I'll also use Chakram against like low-life trash mobs and things like that, but the general idea is Chakram is very cheap. With enough resource cost reduction and a little bit of hatred regen, it actually ends up being almost free or free to use. And what that means is, when you use it, you can use it to crit and generate discipline back with Night Stalker. So the Night Stalker thing is the really important combination here. This is the essential, the real core of the build is Cluster Arrow, and then Chakram, or another cheap hatred spender, and I'll talk about multi-shot in a moment. Chakram, and then you generate discipline, and you simply convert the discipline back into hatred through the use of preparation with the punishment rune. Cost 25 discipline, restores 75 hatred, and eventually we get the sort of gearing to a point. This is a somewhat gear dependent build, and I'll talk a bit about that in a second, but you get the discipline, the conversion to such an efficient point that eventually you kind of effectively get infinite resources with just a little tiny bit of careful management in combat. And basically that means lots and lots of Cluster Arrow uptime. I can often burst down bosses, especially in Torment 2, without even running out of hatred. And then if I do run out of hatred, I can actually switch to Chakram and actually generate hatred quicker. Because if we take a look at my current resource cost reduction is 47, so almost 50%. And this only costs 10 hatred, so let's just take that down to half. That's 5 hatred. My hatred regen is 5 per second, so it's actually kind of free for me. But every time this crits, it can generate a little bit of discipline. Then we can convert that discipline back into hatred. And because this also has its cost reduced as well, so if I just spam this briefly, so we'll get oh, actually, this is probably the wrong way of doing it, but we can sort of see that this should cost 25, so we get to 30-ish there, use it, and what, that only costs like 13, that only costs like 12 or 13 discipline, so the resource cost reductions there make Preparation Punishment even more efficient. So let's go through each of the skills in a little bit more detail, just to show you guys the setup so you can copy this over, and I'll link a calculator down in the description below as well. But basically, Chakram I use for AoE, clearing out trash, and also generating hatred through generating discipline and converting it back to hatred with Preparation Punishment. Cluster Arrow is your main primary source of damage. And then we have Vault with Action Shot. Now this will depend on your current setup with bows. I'm using the Donetter's set, which makes Vault cost Hatred instead of Discipline, which gives me, you know, basically infinite vaulting. And if I do start to run out of Hatred, I can simply Preparation Punishment there. The reason I use Action Shot is it's guaranteed crits, and that helps generate some discipline back with Night Stalker, and there's no reason to use Tumble if you have the Donetter's set, because it reduces discipline costs, and it doesn't actually cost discipline. If you don't have the Donetter's set, you can stick with Tumble, and that's probably a good choice. And you just basically do the same thing, you'll just have to vault around a little bit less. Next up, we use Preparation Punishment for obvious reasons. This allows us to spam our Cluster Arrow more. The entire goal is to be able to spam Cluster Arrow as much as possible, and then Chakram when we kind of need to back off or when we need more AoE. And Preparation Punishment allows us to really get a lot of extra hatred, something like 3-4 times the amount of hatred pool we have by default through the use of Preparation Punishment. So very nice stuff there. Vengeance Sieve gives us 10 extra hatred per second, allows us to spam Cluster Arrow a lot more. So when I get to an elite pack, what I'll do is, actually we'll go to the next skill for a second. Wolf Companion is the next one, because this actually ties together very nicely here. Wolf Companion, I think, is the superior choice over Bat Companion. When I've sort of done the math, Bat Companion gets you a couple of extra cluster arrows every now and then, you know, from the active and from the passive 1 hatred generation per second. However, the damage Wolf Companion gives you 30% increase over 10 seconds, means that you get a lot of extra cluster arrows worth of damage, and when you're putting out all your burst, and Demon Hunter's meant to be a bursty character, Wolf Companion gives you a ton of extra damage for that time. Basically, you know, you kill a boss or you kill an elite pack very quickly once you've got that Wolf Companion up. But what essentially happens is when I find an elite pack or a boss or something like that, I'll pop Wolf Companion, Vengeance, and start cluster arrowing, and you'll see my hatred stays up pretty well. When it starts to get down, simply pop Preparation Punishment, and you can see basically how long we can cluster arrow here for, and the amount of damage we can put out is pretty atrocious, really. It's pretty ridiculous. Demon Hunter has had a big turnaround in our Reaper of Souls, and there we see we start to run out there. What I'll do is I'll switch back to Chakram. So if the boss is still alive, I'll position myself so the Chakram crossover is just there, and the boss is right on top of that, so he's getting hit by 2 shurikens out each time, regenerate a little bit hatred, you know, and I can actually regen hatred just over time by doing this. But with the extra crits and discipline when I'm actually attacking a target, even just a single target like a boss, Chakram works really nicely. So you may have seen other people doing multi-shot builds which are very similar to this, and I actually think maybe if your gearing isn't quite perfect or isn't up to a certain level, which I'll talk about gearing in a bit more detail in a second, Chakram is might be outweighed by something like multi-shot. So what people generally do is they go multi-shot with suppression fire. Now this is a physical skill, keep this in mind. And for each enemy hit, you get 1 extra discipline. So basically the same idea. You fire, you get some discipline back. If you hit up to 6 enemies, you get up to 6 discipline back. Plus any you get crits you get from Night Stalker. Then you do the same thing essentially. You know, you basically just balance it the same way. Now the reason I like to not use multi-shot, firstly, is it's not fire. So this isn't benefiting from any of the fire scaling items that we have, which is a big part of this build. So less damage, and the damage it actually does per hatred is actually much less. 25 hatred and 360 weapon damage compared to Chakram is, if we go back to Chakram here, Twin Chakram is 10 hatred, so multi-shot is 2.5 times the hatred cost, and this does 220 per blade. Now if you're getting them in the crossover, that's 440 damage, and then it's scaled by fire, so this actually does more damage, and it's cheaper as long as you have that positioning right, and the AoE is pretty decent on it as well. You generate a little bit of less discipline, but because it's so cheap on hatred and so efficient on damage and things like that as well, you're still critting. As long as you have enough crit chance, you're going to be getting net positive discipline back really quickly. Now with multi-shot you can fill up your discipline a little bit faster in packs, but against single target, multi-shot actually won't sustain, and you'll see people using multi-shot in their build have to either go find another pack to regenerate the discipline, or they have to back off for a while and can't really use their skills properly, and that's not what you want. You don't want to be backing off ever as a Demon Hunter. So I prefer Chakram because it actually works against single target, against bosses. You can keep your hatred and discipline up, and it works really nicely. In terms of passives, I use Blood Vengeance. Now Blood Vengeance combines with Reaper's Wraps, which is I recommend going for. It's very easy to farm now. I have a video on my YouTube channel, so you can check that out. And it gives hatred based on the maximum primary resource. 28% I've got here. It's up to 30%, I believe. And this is based on your max hatred, so you get 30% of this back. Now, Blood Vengeance also gives you hatred back when you pick up health globes, in addition to a little bit of discipline, but it increases your max hatred as well. So that means, you know, Reaper's Wraps becomes more effective with this passive. It's just a really nice combination. Whenever I pick up health globe, I pretty much go from empty to full, so it works out really nicely. Night Stalker, for obvious reasons, I've already covered the crap out of that. And Archery, because we're going to be using 2 one-handed bows, and I highly recommend most Demon Hunters go for 2 one-handed bows. Now, as long as you have access to 2 one-handed bows, then if you don't, you probably don't want to be using this build, but you want to go for 2 one-handed bows. It gives you extra crit chance and extra hatred per second as well, which just helps things a little bit. Now, Awareness is the final passive, and this is actually a bit of a wild card. You don't need to use Awareness. There's a few other things you can use. You can use like Ambush, you can use... I don't recommend Steady Aim so much, but there's a few other little options you can go for there, which don't work too badly. And the other one, I think, the reason I go for Awareness is I'm using this helmet here, Pride's Fall. Now, Pride's Fall resource cost is reduced by 30% after not taking damage for 5 seconds. Now, what Awareness does is it increases your dodge chance up to 100%, so you'll see my dodge chance is now at 100%. Now when something hits me, you know, or should have hit me, I dodge that and that gets reset back down to the 50-ish% that it's normally at. And what happens then is I don't lose my Pride's Fall effect, so I'm keeping this 30% reduced resource cost reduction, which is absolutely huge and allows us to spam heaps of extra cluster arrows, be much more efficient with preparation punishment, etc, etc. And basically, Awareness allows us to keep that effect up a lot of the time. As a Demon Hunter, you want to be moving around, you know, staying at range just a little bit, kiting, stutter stepping, you know, keeping yourself from getting hit. You'll get hit maybe once every 30 seconds. That's generally how often I'm getting hit, and every 30 to 60 seconds, and that's enough time for Awareness to get you back up to 100%. So a lot of the time, you just won't take damage. Only against some AoEs will you ever lose Pride's Fall, and that's kind of okay. You can still sort of get by without it, but you're certainly much more efficient when this is up, and that's why I choose to use Awareness. Now, if you don't have Pride's Fall, you don't need to use Awareness, obviously. There's no reason to use that. You could use something like Ambush or Perfectionist, are both great choices. But if you want to farm for Pride's Fall, it comes from the Act 3 Bounty Heraldry caches, so you want to farm those caches to get this, and I actually think this is a best-in-slot item. Now, the other good helmet is Endariel's Visage. It's a pretty nice helmet. It gives you a lot of tooltip DPS, but 30% resource cost reduction is way better than that tooltip DPS, and allows you to be a much more efficient killing machine, and that's what it's about. It's about being efficient. Man, I love Demon Hunter. The synergies between all these skills and items are so good now in Reaper of Souls. It's so good. The class feels so much fun to play. But anyway, let's talk about some of the other items you can use. Magefist I consider to be best in slot gloves. They roll with fire damage, and this works really well. You'll notice I have fire damage on braces as well. Cluster arrow on the helmet, cluster arrow on the boots. Get all of these things, they're very important. And fire damage on the amulet there as well. Magefist are another best in slot. They're just a nice pair of gloves, but they also roll fire damage. So this is going to help with both the cluster arrows and the Chakram. So lots of extra damage there. And then, the other really, really best in slot item, which is one I don't have and I want to try and get it, I'm trying to get it, is Cindercoat. Now, Cindercoat reduces the resource cost of fire skills, obviously this is awesome, and increases the damage of fire skills. Again, it's just flat out best in slot for a build like this, and for a lot of different Demon Hunter builds. Now, if you want to sort of start using this build, here are the rough breakpoints. I'll try and break these down for you guys in as much detail as I can. But basically, I don't think you should try and do this build if you have below 40% crit chance. It's pretty hard to be efficient on Night Stalker if you have less than 40% crit chance. Now, in terms of tooltip DPS, you can do this on as little as 500k DPS. In fact, I was up to 1.1 million for a while, and I actually dropped DPS and became more effective on higher torments by getting a lot of effective damage and things that enabled this build to work. So tooltip DPS is not everything, guys. So you can do this with 500k tooltip DPS. Now I recommend around 5 to 6 million toughness. Toughness on a Demon Hunter is about taking that occasional hit you do take. Every now and then you'll take a bit of AoE damage, you'll get vortexed or something like that you can't avoid, and you want to be able to take that damage and keep going. You don't want to die, you don't want to lose your shrines, you don't want to lose your bonus experience and things like that. So this allows you to make 1, 2, maybe 3 mistakes without dying, and that's what that's about. More toughness is certainly helpful, but I wouldn't sacrifice, I wouldn't go too crazy trying to get above that for doing torments 1 to 4. If you're trying to get 5 to 6, you'll probably want closer to 10 million toughness, 8 to 10 million maybe. But that's basically the sheet DPS and toughness, not too important, but you do want that 40% crit chance. Now, I think either Pride's Fall or Cindercoat are necessary for this. Now, they both do the same thing of reducing your resource costs by a lot, but you can have one or the other. I think you can do this with one or the other. Once you get both, however, things will get really kicking, and I can't wait to get that Cindercoat. Now, in addition to that, there's other things you can do. Everything else just enhances the build. The only thing I think is necessary is 40% crit chance at least, and you know, a reasonable amount of damage and toughness, as I said, and then either Pride's Fall or Cindercoat. So that's the only requirements. Now, the enhancing things, however, are Reaper's Wraps. They are, for obvious reasons, I've already explained that. As I said, the fire damage on, you know, fire damage, cluster damage, fire damage, and Stone of Jordan is also a really big enhancing item. Damage against elites helps you a lot with your burst against packs, and extra fire damage as well. Really nice item to get. This is pretty rare though, so don't get too stressed if you can't get this right away. And then another enhancing item is actually the Captain Crimson set. I made a guide on how to craft this as well. And this reduces your resource cost by 10% when you have the 3 set bonus. Obviously, you can combo this with 2 of the items and a Ring of Royal Grandeur to get the 3 set, and that works just fine. The extra 10% resource cost reduction is pretty nice. Other things to look at, resource cost reduction on shoulders are pretty good. You know, this is usually just taking the slot of something like regen anyway, so it's a very nice one to get. And other than that, you know, just try and get your crit chance and crit damage items wherever you can. Now, Danetta's set, as I've mentioned, is really good for mobility. You can't beat Danetta's for mobility. The ability to vault around almost infinitely is really, really sick. Otherwise, really good options are things like Calamity and Helltrapper and the Natalia's crossbow. But basically, 2 one-hand crossbows are, I think, the best choice. If you're stuck with a 2-hander or a 2-hander and a quiver or something like that, or maybe just one one-hander and a quiver, then you should probably stick with like an Entangling Shot cluster arrow build instead. Okay, so I think that covers most of it. We'll just go through the Paragon points finally. I recommend move speed up to 25%, max hatred, synergizes really well with Reaper's Wraps. Now, I recommend prioritizing crit chance over crit damage unless the damage you get from crit damage is much bigger than crit chance. So if you're at like 50% crit chance, but you're only at like 200% crit damage, then you should get crit damage. But otherwise, go for crit chance. It helps with Night Stalker. Other than that, All Resist I think is probably generally the best for Demon Hunters. A bit of life certainly doesn't hurt after that. And utility, resource cost reduction is an obvious choice, and then area damage. I don't rate life gain on hit, I don't rate regen because I mentioned you're not getting hit and we're using something like awareness to keep ourselves from getting hit. And otherwise, even if you're not using awareness, you're generally not getting hit all that often. You have enough time to use a potion or grab a health globe, and you are grabbing a lot of health globes with Reaper's Wraps. And the other thing I don't rate, guys, is attack speed. I don't think attack speed is all that useful. You get more than enough just from 2 one-hand crossbows. It inflates your sheet DPS like crazy, but it doesn't actually give you a real sense of where your character's at and doesn't actually affect the build all that much. Thanks, so I'll just start opening up with some cluster arrows. Pretty easy stuff, just cluster arrow these guys down. Vault, you know, try and subconsciously get yourself to start going for those health globes. You'll see I vaulted over the top of that. Pretty easy stuff. If you have a bit of pickup radius, it shouldn't be too hard. Now I'm kind of like not really intentionally firing many chakrams, but it happens a bit, and that's fine. So my hatred gets low, I pop Preparation Punishment, I keep doing it here. I'll just keep cluster arrowing everything down here. I'm going to keep vaulting through. Now I'll show you the point where we start using Chakram. Around here is where we start using Chakram. Now I'll burst it up, I can actually use another cluster arrow now. We're getting a bit low. You'll see my discipline going up from the Chakram usage. I can throw this up. I'll reposition since I'm getting hit. It's making Pride's Fall less effective. I'll use some cluster arrows here. I'll just reposition away from that elite for now. I can pop Vengeance now that this thing's almost done. It brings up my resources a lot. I can go back to spamming cluster arrow like crazy. You'll see my resources are full again. Spamming like crazy. You know, just keep balancing that out. Okay, Discipline's low. Switch back to Chakram. Discipline's back up. You'll see Vengeance really generates your Discipline very quickly because of the extra hits and the extra crits it's getting for Night Stalker. It takes a little bit to learn the resource management, and you kind of just get used to once you get around to this point. We start using Chakram until we can get our Discipline back up. Once your Discipline's low, that's when you want to switch to Chakram. So we're pretty good now. We can go back to spamming a little bit, start using Chakram again. Just make sure you're not running out. You can keep going, you know, use that wolf whenever you want to help burst down a pack or something like that. And it works out to be pretty effective, I think Torment 2 might be a little bit more efficient for me at this moment. Can't wait to get that Cindercoat. I'm going to be like Torment 3 or 4 smashing it. But this has been a lot of fun, guys. I really can't even overstate how much fun it is to play a Demon Hunter like this without a resource generator. So much faster, so much more bursty, and just feels really good. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you have any questions about the build. Hopefully that explains it. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.